If there's one thing I take pride in as a Hearthstone content creator, it's my rating system for cards. Most rating systems on a scale of 1 to 5 are at best oversimplistic, and at worst flat out incorrect or uninformative. For example, some rating systems justify their existence by rating the card's impact on the meta, which unfortunately dates the rating after approximately 4 months. And with Hearthstone constantly introducing mechanics that encourage deck variety, what's good, what's bad, and what's decent in Hearthstone is more complex now than ever, and I feel a good rating system should reflect that. However, that does not mean my system is perfect. Since I introduced the idea at the start of this year, it has undergone some constructive criticism, and I have mulled over some of its flaws. With this information at hand, I've adjusted the rating system to patch up these weak points. With this update, I figured now would be a good time to reintroduce it to you, my audience. So without further ado, here is the Penniless Hearthstone Rating System 2.0. First of all, this new system has more ratings. While the old system had 11 different ways to judge a card, this one has 15, with the possibility of more being added. Before you rage in the comments as to how needlessly complex this is, relax. Of these 15 ratings, 12 of them are broken up into nice simple groups of 3. Outside of that, we have the highest and lowest ratings, Crafted Golden, and Mostest Stupidest. These are unchanged from the old system. Crafted Golden consists of cards that are absolutely necessary if you want a complete collection. This includes Dr. Boom, Blood Reaver Gul'dan, and others. Mostest Stupidest, meanwhile, consists of cards that, if they were removed from the game, practically nothing would happen. Silverback Patriarch, Magma Rager, Millhouse Mana Storm. Very simply, these ratings are the extreme. Once again, the mana cost of these rating cards is highly significant. This cost is the shorthand of what I'd give the card on a scale of 1 to 5. Though even that can be complicated, since people on the internet and just generally in life are very quick to give 5-star ratings to everything. So before we get to the middle families of ratings, allow me to explain what these numbers mean. 1 mana means the card is much weaker than it needed to be. Not even a significant buff would save it. 2 mana means it's slightly weaker than average. 3 mana means it's exactly the power I would expect. 4 mana means it's slightly strong, but that pretty much just means that it's playable and constructed. And 5 mana means it's so strong that everyone on the internet knows this card's name, guaranteed. That said, cards of a lower rating are not immediately disqualified from the meta. With the right synergies, even low power cards can have their capabilities boosted. Every card in the game is strong in some cases and weak in others. The mana ratings simply describe the average of these power levels. But some of you may ask, what about the odds the card will be in the meta? For that, I've also added a visual system, the color of the rating. Dark blue describes a very small chance, perhaps only coming 2 with a strong synergy. Purple means that it may or may not. It depends a lot on the state of the meta and available synergies to say one way or another. Red describes a card that odds are will make it in somehow. It isn't guaranteed, especially if it's a class card with limited support, but it's more likely than the average card. And white means that it's extremely likely unless it receives no support whatsoever. With that out of the way, let's look at the ratings themselves. The most common ratings are in 3 groups: simple cards, complex cards, and semi-complex cards. Semi-complex is new from the last time I described this system, because I got sick of having to decide if cards like Spiteful Summoner were complex or simple. You'll notice the rarities of these ratings. The trend is very basic. The rarer the rating, the more complex the card. Common for simple, rare for semi-complex, epic for complex. This is another new feature to the system, to allow a way to visually distinguish between these families. In case you're still confused, here's a quick example of each rating in action. I'll include some Rastakhan cards here. Bear in mind that these ratings may be inaccurate, because these cards haven't been released to the game, and I may be an idiot sometimes. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's begin. Sadly Lacking describes cards that are simply too weak, while also being difficult to make stronger strategically. This is pretty much the worst rating I can give a card, simply because it's boring. Even Mostest Stupidest is interesting in how the card is stupid. So far, Blizzard hasn't announced any cards like that for Rastakhan, but give them time, they'll show up. Fun for the Arena, meanwhile, has cards like Ironhide Direhorn, Waterboy, and Reckless Dire Troll, since they are on par for strength. While these cards don't usually see the meta, it's worth noting that Reckless Dire Troll has some pretty strong synergies lined up. Those synergies are what would allow something of this rating to be able to see play. This leads to pretty good having a new challenger and Daring Fire Eater. that card being pretty much the equivalent of a 3 mana 1/1 deal 3 damage. While these cards can have synergies that boost them further, those synergies are separate from the card's initial design. Almost Alright is a card like Shriek. While a circumstance can come about where it may be strong, it requires both precise deck building and a bit of luck. Strong in the right deck would go to cards like Spirit of the Dragonhawk and Grawl the Shark. Given tools that work with the card, it can do halfway alright. And deck-defining is a card like Bwonswamdi, Smolderthorn Lancer, and Soul Warden. With the proper support, these cards can be powerful tools, but not to the extent of more challenging cards to play. Though again, synergies can further boost them. For Stupid and Less Not, we have Hakar the Soulflayer. Sure, it's possible that a combination can be done with this card, but outside of that circumstance, it is slow and prone to backfiring. Decent if you're decent includes cards like Zentimo and Spirit of the Dead. These cards can be powerful if they're used wisely and correctly. And amazing if used right includes Undasta. The power possible with this card once again requires both strategy and deck building, making it harder to use but more powerful than most cards in the game. In short, simple cards can be played by themselves with no issue, but often can't be made much stronger. Semi-complex requires one or two small aspects to work properly, or may be an excellent gateway to a common synergy. Complex cards require careful planning to be strong, and a lack of forethought would render them even less useful than a Mostest Stupidest card. Now, onto the final family of ratings, tech cards. These cards' power depends significantly on what the opponent plays. Whether the card gets the high rating or the low rating depends on how common the circumstance is and how strong the result is. The darkness counters very unusual decks, but only sometimes, so it's okay in some metas. Galaka Crawler is strong against pirates, which may or may not be around, hence its middle rating. And Belligerent Gnome is strong against the concept of having multiple minions, which is fairly common, so it's excellent in most metas. Eagle-eyed viewers will note that I gave this card a completely different rating last video. Like I said, I'm sometimes an idiot, and I'm allowed to change my mind. This card is quite good, let's move on. These ratings can describe the vast majority of cards in Hearthstone. The main gray area is where cards with board clear effects go. These cards are strong depending on your opponent's choices, which makes them like tech cards, but they're common enough and useful enough to justify not sorting them in there. After a lot of thought, I decided most of them should get simple ratings, except in unique circumstances where their power can be greatly varied. Flamestrike is pretty good, but Defile is amazing if used right, and Hellfire is strong in the right deck. With that edge case accounted for, most cards in Hearthstone can be rated using these 14 ratings. However, there is one final catch. Some cards just break the basic rules. Baku, Gen, and Reno are not the type of cards that can be rated in this manner. You could argue deck defining, but I consider that oversimplistic. These cards don't just define decks, they create decks. Making a deck of just odd-costed cards is idiocy unless Baku is used. So cards like that get their own rating, deck creating. You'll note that this is where I use the legendary gemstone. The strength of these cards is less dependent on the card itself and more on the deck you build around it, hence why it gets its own category. These legendary ratings are basically just for cards that are uniquely situational, and I may have a few more ratings up my sleeve for them. But for now, Blizzard hasn't printed cards that qualify for those ratings, so I'll just keep them to myself for now. To give you an idea, Skulking Geist almost qualifies for one of these ratings, but for now I just call it a tech card. And that's about it! With this rating system, the idea of how strong a card is, how hard it is to play, and how likely it is to see the meta are much more clear than a simple 1 to 5 star rating. That said, each card still requires some critical thought. Synergies can make certain cards stronger, and metas can bring out the strengths of some cards and weaknesses of others. And other unusual circumstances may make weak cards come into use anyways. But as an initial look at a card, this system helps narrow down what we are looking for. As always, leave a comment if you have a question, remark, or criticism. Just remember to be respectful. I'll see you all next time, hopefully examining some more of these new cards Rastakhan has in store for us.